Hi, my name is Janet Wagner, and I would like to spend a few minutes today talking about my experiences with the Victim Offender Reconciliation Program. I was involved with this program probably 15 or so years ago, and before, maybe I need to back up a little bit. Before that, my son died in 1994 and had quite a group of friends. And after he died, we encouraged his friends to come by the house and maintain contact with us, which they did. And they were fairly free about coming in and out of the house and visiting with us and so on. Well then, like I said, about 15 or so years ago, one day I got a phone call from a grocery store, and one of my checks was trying to be cashed at the store. And what turned out to be the situation is that one of our son's friends had come by the house, and while he was there had taken a check. He tried to cash the check at a grocery store, and it was caught because of the handwriting and so on. And what happened after that, as far as him being arrested or anything like that, I don't know. But as time went on, what I wanted was to repair my relationship with this young man, who at the time was probably about, I would say he was probably 14 or 15, and he was friends with all these other kids that were coming around, and we would send messages to him through these other friends. But he was just too embarrassed to come back to the house, and was not being in contact with us, didn't seem to want to come by because he was just too embarrassed. One day, we also had a house next to us that we were renting, and we were renting it to a lawyer who was with the district attorney's office. And this particular case came across her desk, and she was concerned that there might be a conflict of interest since she was renting from us. But she mentioned the situation to us. And I told her at the time, I can even remember where we were standing, which was in the driveway between the two houses. And I said, what I really want to do is to talk with this young man. I want us to talk about the situation and get together that way. And she mentioned that she had heard about this program called Victim Offender Reconciliation, and that it was, the idea behind it was to bring together the victim and the offender and talk with a mediator to mediate the sides and come together for a resolution to the situation. What do you want as an outcome? And for me, my outcome was so that this young man would come back to our house, that we could resume our relationship, that he would feel welcome at the house and not be embarrassed. And I said, that's what I want. And I don't know what happened all behind the scenes, but eventually I was contacted by the director of the Victim Offender Reconciliation Program, Alice Price, and she helped set up the mediation situation, which we did in our house, in my house. And the young man came to the house, Alice was there, and she mediated between us. We talked, each one of us talked about our situation, what had happened, and what we wanted the outcome to be, which we both wanted the same kind of outcome. And through this process, we were able to come to a resolution so that this young man felt like he could come back to our house, and we resumed our relationship. And I don't think without this program that would have ever happened. Because of this program, I became more interested in the restorative justice system as opposed to the criminal justice system. So I took the Victim Offender Reconciliation Program had a class that they gave to teach mediators how to work in that process. And so I took the class, which I found extremely good. I do have a background in psychology, so I found a lot of what they presented was refresher material that I needed to be reminded about, how to listen and be reflective in what you heard. And through that program, then I became a mediator. I did some mediation, and then also became involved with the board. Since then, I know the program has become broader based. It does a lot of work in the schools with bullying, community work. But let me go back to the situation with this young man for just a few minutes. He continued to come by the house. One time when he was in college, he was having difficulty with an English class that he needed to pass. And I remember, again, it was over Christmas vacation, and he came by the house with all of his paperwork for this English class. And my husband helped him work on the class. As this young man said, he said, "I only want to get a C. You don't have to make it look like an A, Mike." But in the course of everything, Mike wanted it to be, the top-notch rate. Anyway, he ended up getting a B in the class. Unfortunately, this young man died probably about 10 years ago, and a year later, they were having his internment in Idaho in an area called Grangeville. And we went to that, and as I stood on this hill in this cemetery, I felt the closest to heaven that I'd have ever been. And we had never buried our son's ashes. And right then and there, I knew where I wanted to bury my son's ashes. And although it took probably another 6 years to make that happen, Ryan's ashes and this young man's ashes are buried right next to each other in this beautiful spot in Idaho that's the closest to heaven you'll ever get. It looks out over fields and valleys, and it's just gorgeous. And they're there together, and that's how it should be. I know for a fact that without this restorative justice process, we would not have been able to repair our relationship. He would not have ever come back to the house. He would have stayed away. And we both would have lost so much. I can't even begin to describe what we would have lost if we hadn't used this program. And I was so very proud of him. It was not an easy thing for a 15-year-old to do. He didn't have his parents there. And even in doing that, I was so proud of him and felt like it was a character building experience for him. That was a lifelong experience for him. And for me, it solved I didn't want to lose him as a friend, and we remained friends forever. I mean, in some ways forever. In my heart, he's still my friend. I can't say enough about the restorative justice program and the emphasis on restoring relationships as opposed to punishing, which doesn't always solve every problem. It might seem to some people listening to this that stealing a 15-year-old, 14-year-old stealing a check and trying to forge it and pass it off is not a major situation to be fussed with. But first, it's an incident that could have developed into something more, and it didn't. I feel like we brought it together and focused on it and set it straight. In the criminal justice system, the focus is always on the criminal. They get a lot of the attention, the lawyer's there to help them and all this sort of stuff, and the victim is kind of left off somewhere else. And in the restorative justice system, the victim is thought about as much as the criminal is thought about, and what that victim needs to feel safe and being able to trust again in any situation. In this situation, it was being able to trust this young man to be back in my house. In other situations, it can be bigger than that, but it's important that the victim have a voice, I think. So by bringing the victim and the offender together, this allows the victim to have a say in what they want to see happen with the offender, but it also allows the offender to see the victim and accept responsibility for what they've done to this person, and for the victim to feel like they are sort of empowered in the situation. So I think both parties, or I would hope both parties, come away feeling more settled with themselves, so that there isn't fear involved with being a victim, which can happen, and with the offender accepting responsibility, knowing that what he did or what she did was wrong. There are consequences to any action, small or big, and that has to be accepted.